Hello.
Hello.
I'm Hilary.
And I'm Indigo.
And you're listening to The Full Blossom of the Evening, a podcast about David Lynch and Twin Peaks.
Listeners, we're going to tell it to you, and we're going to tell it to you straight. Today, we're talking about
Good Times on Our Street.
And I saw her glowing. I saw her smiling. I feel like I'm gonna dream tonight.
So, listeners, because you are big fans of David Lynch, we're reasonably sure you have heard of this book, Good Times on Our Street. Right, Indigo?
Yeah, this is something that David has talked about a lot in interviews. He loves to mention this, and it's also mentioned in Room to Dream.
Yes, I actually have this quote in our notes because I thought it was so sweet that Christine McKenna calls Good Times on Our Street a, quote, children's book that permanently lodged itself in David's mind.
Yes, and while we've been prepping for this episode, we've been talking a lot about how we can see so much how this book really affected the way that David moves through the world. It shows off his sense of humor, his views on what's right and what's wrong, the way he treats his fellow humans. But first, we're going to start off with just some of the history of children's readers and the way that this one and ones of this time stand out a little bit more than ones of the past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that when we first started researching for this episode, unsurprisingly, we could not find any scholarly articles on Good Times on Our Street, a long-forgotten children's basal reader from the 1940s. There was nothing.
Who would be interested, except for us?
Not a single hit on JSTOR or any of the other scholarly article databases. Oh, well. But there is some really interesting research on the history of basal readers in America, and so we're going to touch on that briefly. Because basal readers have such an interesting place in American history and culture, a brief introduction to that is really going to enrich and clarify our discussion of this book in particular. From their earliest incarnations, basal readers, like Good Times on Our Street, were meant to teach children reading, but also they were there, more importantly, to teach values.
Yeah, basal readers first appeared in the 19th century and changed dramatically in the 20th century.
We're going to talk about two different 19th century basal readers today. A bit later, we're going to talk about the Rollo series, that's spelled R-O-L-L-O. We are going to start with the most famous of these 19th century basal readers, that's the McGuffey readers. But something came before them, and that was the primer.
So the New England Primer, first published in 1688, was heavily religious. It was called the Little Bible of New England, reinforcing Puritan beliefs and social norms, which were things like threats of eternal damnation.
Right, while a 6 to 8-year-old is learning to read.
Right.
Right.
You know, there's nothing like being like, hey, little kid, did you know you're going to hell? just for probably like, I don't know, like not going to bed on time.
A is for the apple.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
A is for the apple for the sinners.
we're not quoting the New England Primer here.
No,
for
these
sure.
are not direct quotes.
But, right, so that had this obvious didactic purpose, right? Reinforcing Puritan dogma as it teaches children to read. So by the 1830s, or first in the 1830s, we have the McGuffey reader. And so we're moving into the 19th century, and now basal readers are less overtly religious than primers. Mm-hmm. The McGuffey reader claimed to embrace, quote, non-sectarianism. McGuffey was trying to draw on religion without promoting any specific dogma. The books kept a really high moral tone, and they kept that mission of imparting values while teaching reading. But instead of, Puritan beliefs, it was focused on things like the golden rule, civic virtues, far less overtly religious.
Right. And part of the motivation for these is understandable. Large-scale immigration defines the American 19th century. And how do you unify a nation of immigrants? How do you define and teach American culture and language to such a geographically enormous country with a culturally and linguistically diverse population? According to the article Strange Afterlife of William McGuffey and His Readers by Johann Neem, McGuffey's goal was to find a middle ground, a place where diverse Americans could come together around shared values in order to participate in common public institutions. The book was meant to encourage American children to see themselves as part of the nation, while, of course, also teaching them to read.
Now, the last McGuffey edition was in 1901. And then in the 20th century, so early to mid 20th century, we get a lot of different versions of the Basal Reader. The most famous of those now are the Dick and Jane books. Those were published by Scott Forsman and Company. That's what most of us have heard of, right? Dick and
think
Jane.
All of us, whether you read them or you just know them through pop culture.
Yes.
Because that's the thing. I mean, now there's that movie like Fun with Dick and Jane or something like, lots of like parodies of them now.
Yes.
It's a title that you'll recognize.
Yes. Good Times on Our Street wasn't one of the Dick and Jane books. It was part of the less famous Macmillan Readers series. It was written by Arthur Gates, Miriam Blanton Huber, and Frank Seeley Salisbury. They wrote a lot of these Macmillan Readers. So why are we spending time grounding this book in its history? One stated purpose of these readers was to impress young minds with particular ideas of American culture and certain values and worldviews.
What those values and worldviews were changed dramatically over the centuries, and the worldview of Good Times on Our Street that shaped David Lynch was a distinctly 20th century American one.
Absolutely. And to show what makes this 20th century worldview distinct, it's useful and very entertaining to contrast it with the 19th century one. We didn't have to do this ourselves. Luckily, a scholar by the name of Richard Mandel published an article called Children's Books, Mirrors of Social Development, in 1964, and this was through the University of Chicago Press. So Mandel analyzed the different perspectives on children's lives and adults' roles in 19th century Basal Readers, the Rollo books by Jacob Abbott, and the Dick and Jane books that Good Times on Our Street is similar to.
So Mandel's analysis shows a sharp turn in the way children are perceived and treated in American culture.
Yes.
So, yeah, because the Rollo books were really intense and mean.
Mean. I mean, in the world of the Rollo books, this is the 19th century, the world is a serious, difficult place. Trouble is everywhere, including, and perhaps especially, within the inherently evil nature of children. And don't forget, we're talking about 6 to 8 year olds.
Right, they're just little guys.
Yeah.
But children, especially imperfect ones like Rollo, must work hard to learn how to live properly in society. This is the way that it paints it. The pattern Rollo follows over and over is making a mistake that leads to a long, harsh lecture from his father that also then serves as a lecture to the child that's reading the book. So it's not just like, Rollo, you are very bad. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should feel bad about yourself. The kid that's reading it has been handed this book because their parents want them to also feel bad. So Rollo and 19th century readers learn through precepts, not experience. The father dictates to them right from wrong and criticizes them with incredibly harsh language.
Oh, I have an example of that.
Yes, please.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to quote from one of these Rollo books. The situation here is that little Rollo, who's, 6 to 8, is excited to go on a picnic. And he's been really looking forward to this picnic. And then it's going to rain. And so little first or second grade Rollo is so disappointed, and he's insisting that they should still go on the picnic even though it rains. Here in the 21st century, we're like, aw.
Yeah, we're just like, oh, he was so excited. And yeah, I totally feel for him. I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, honestly, that happened on my birthday. It was supposed to be a picnic, and then it was the heat wave, so I had to cancel. And I was really sad.
Well, let's see how fathers in 1835 to roughly 1842, when these books were written, would have reacted.
mean.
I'm going to quote the dad. You are self-conceited, vainly imagining that you, a little boy of 7 years old, can judge better than your father and mother, and obstinately persisting in your opinion that it is not going to rain, when the rain has actually commenced and is falling faster and faster. You are ungrateful to speak reproachfully of me and give me pain by your ill will when I have been planning this excursion. I'm going to skip a little. He calls him undutiful in showing such a repining, unsubmissive spirit toward your father, unjust in making Lucy and all of us suffer because you are unwilling to submit to these circumstances, selfish in being unwilling that it should rain and interfere with your ride, when you know that rain is so much wanted in all the fields all over the country. And finally, impious in openly rebelling against God and censuring the arrangements of his providence and pretending to think that they are made just to trouble you.
He's like, you disrespected our family, you disrespected the farmers that want rain, and you disrespected God by simply wanting to have a picnic and being sad that it rained.
Oh, and I mean, to quote such a long passage from a book that is not Good Times on Our Street, I had to do it because the contrast between this and what follows. I think you're crying.
I'm in
Indigo.
tears. I am.
Well, I actually had to cover my mouth and go away from the microphone.
That's true, you did. I mean, it's just so ridiculous.
Wait, here's the capper of it. Would you like to know the name of the book that this is?
What is the title? Is it just Rollo should be ashamed? Rollo disrespects God and the farmer.
Okay, we had to pause.
We were laughing too hard.
I'm about to tell you the name of the book.
The actual name.
The actual name of this book is Rollo at Play.
Here we go again.
Rollo at Play.
Like, how is that Rollo playing? That is just Rollo getting screamed at by his dad for daring to want to have a nice day outside. Like, where is the play if the whole point is that Rollo doesn't get to go outside and just gets yelled at?
And for being, let's highlight those adjectives again.
Yeah.
Self-conceited, ungrateful, undutiful, unjust, selfish, and impious.
How dare Rollo?
This is something we'll see throughout the Rollo books, though. Rollo's goal, his only goal, is to please his father, and his reward for good behavior is feeling secure and happy when his father is pleased. There is no such thing as unconditional love. In fact, it's just the opposite. Throughout the Rollo series and 19th century basal readers, the emphasis is on children being careful, faithful, obedient children who their parents then will love. So, Indigo, you've asked me to talk about this selling the boy story.
Yeah, this came up when we were going over our meeting notes, our first sort of round of meeting and talking. But I think this is such a perfect example. Like this, again, reminder listeners, this is for little kids to read. This is like, hi, little 6-year-old kid. Do you want to learn how to spell and read? What if you read a story about
Selling a boy, in which a poor father tries to sell his own son to get bread to eat. He is offered first $1, then $10, then $100 for his boy. Each time he rejects the money because it is not enough to compensate for his good companion, who will be unable to share the bread and may be treated harshly. The father finally determines not to sell his son, but to find work to support them both. This is, I'm quoting our article again, but now the article is going to quote the Rollo story. Here's the conclusion. This is a fictitious story. It is written to teach children that if they are good and kind and obedient, their fathers will love them and work hard if necessary to get them bread and will not sell them, even if anybody should offer them $1,000.
Which is just like, are you serious?
Yes.
I would hope that no one's going to sell their children, even if they're not perfect.
And knowing what literal thinkers elementary age children are, they're going to take that literally. If there's meant to be any kind of humor or exaggeration there, a small child is not going to see that. A small child is going to say, I'd better be good or my dad might sell me.
Right. It's like the same sort of thing that like when you're a kid, there's all those sorts of like legends and stories that people say, like, I know I heard like the one where it's like, if you swallow a watermelon seed, it's going to grow inside of you, or stuff like that. Kids hear this stuff and they take it so seriously and they get so scared. So there were for sure little kids that were reading this and thinking, oh my God, I have to be really good or my parents will sell me.
And that's the 19th century view of children, of childhood, and that's taught through these basal readers. Children are inherently bad. They need to be reined in by the wise adults, particularly the father. The reward for being good is the love of your parents. That is not the world of Good Times on Our Street. That's not the world of the 20th century childhood that David Lynch had. But the contrast makes the values that Good Times on Our Street teaches, I think, so much more vivid.
Oh, yeah.
So how do we see children in these readers?
It's so much better. It's so much better. So in comparison, 20th century characters learn through experiences with other children, and the action focuses almost entirely on children interacting in a variety of fun places and lighthearted scenarios. They're left entirely to their own devices. The 20th century children are kind, empathetic, and really generous with each other. They're kind to each other. The world is not harsh and difficult, but pleasant and fun. Adults are peripheral, but when they appear, they are always benevolent, encouraging, and loving. I think encouraging is like the really, really strong word there. Like it's never this, well, you better be good or I'm going to sell you. It's like, hey, so this thing happened and maybe we learned something from this, right?
Absolutely. Because when the children make mistakes, the mistakes mildly teach the lessons themselves. So like a bee sting is its own punishment. Yeah. The adults, the kind adults in Good Times on Our Street and in the Dick and Jane stories, they're there to help the children cope with the consequences of those mistakes and to repair the damage. But they are not there to lecture or to dehumanize or to shame their children. So sitting in wet paint, is its own punishment. Getting stung by a bee. Rollo's dad doesn't need to show up and start lecturing about impiousness. Right. The poor farmers.
Right. For example, there's a story where a boy sits in wet paint. He goes for a bike ride.
In Good Times on Our Street.
Yes. Yeah, he goes for a bike ride and finds this lovely overlook spot and sits down on the bench, doesn't realize that the paint is wet, and comes home with these stripes, and his family doesn't yell at him.
No, his grandmother laughs.
Yeah, and
he's gone to visit his grandmother. Yeah, and she cleans it for him, and then they go out for a lovely day of fun.
Right. Yeah. Which also, this is one of those examples that it gives us some reference for David's sense of humor, too. This is when we've talked about in a previous episode, the recalcitrant object. Yes. This is such a great example of this. This bench betrayed him. But
he just sat down to have to enjoy the nice view.
Yeah, right. He was just like, wow, this is such a pretty little spot here. Sits down on the bench, does not realize is covered in paint. But he doesn't get in trouble. If this was Rollo, he would get berated. He would get yelled at for being stupid, for making this mistake, for, not being aware of his surroundings or something. I'm sure it would be like a lesson on, you have to be aware of your surroundings. You're an embarrassment to the family because you're not presenting yourself in the proper way or something. Like, you look so silly. You should be dressed, you should be clean all the time or something.
Right, yes. Another story that we both really liked in this, maybe because it involves a cat, but it's about Topsy the kitten. So this, again, is in Good Times on Our Street, 20th century. So different.
Yes.
Topsy has a problem. She doesn't want to be a kitten. She has a super nice cat mom, but she doesn't like getting baths.
Yeah, which is just like, again, this is such a cute book.
So cute.
It's just like, Topsy's just like, I don't want to get baths from my mama cat, so I've decided I'm not going to be a cat anymore. And then goes on a little adventure.
Her cute little adventure is she leaves Mother Cat and she tries to live with other animal families. I think like a squirrel.
Yeah, it's like a squirrel, rabbits,
a beaver.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, predictably, Topsy doesn't vibe with these other animals' lifestyles.
Yeah, like with the squirrels, they're like, okay, well, if you're a squirrel, you have to help us go find nuts because we got to stock up on nuts. And she was like, I don't want to do that.
Indigo, I think you should just reenact all of Good Times on Our Street.
I love it.
Very
it's
cute.
so cute.
I love your voices for it. But Topsy, on her own, decides to go home to Mother Cat and stay a kitten. Importantly, there's no punishment.
No, and even when she leaves each of these animal families, they're always like, well, okay, we'll come back anytime.
Yeah, it's very friendly.
They're all just like, okay, well, if that's the case, that's all right. It was nice having you. You know, like everyone is super nice about it. There's no shame. There's no like, well, you said that you wanted this and now you've changed your mind. You know, again, if this was Rollo, it would be like, oh, you're so fickle. You can't make up your mind, and that is bad.
And how dare you challenge your parents? Aren't we good to you? Aren't we kind to you?
Yeah, Rollo would never be able to even leave the house.
No.
Or at least would never be able to come back.
No. And all that happens to little Topsy is she comes back from her adventure, and Mother Cat's like, oh, I'm glad to see you. Here's you must want something to eat.
Yeah, that's like the best part too. Is like Mother Cat's just like, are you hungry?
Yeah.
Like, have some food. Sit down. Have some food.
No anger, no lecture, no drama. Just welcome home, Topsy kitten.
Yeah, just let her learn the lesson on her own.
Right, because Topsy's personal experiences taught her the lesson.
Gave her the agency to do that.
Yes. If Topsy had Rollo's dad, as Indigo said, she would have just received this like stern disquisition about her foolishness and ingratitude and sent off to do farm work.
Yeah, would have absolutely been punished.
Yeah, but the end result is the same. And I think this is where it becomes very, very vivid, the difference between these two approaches, but they achieve the same thing. Topsy learns and accepts appreciating being a kitten.
Yeah. She's like, actually, this is the best thing for me.
Yeah.
I like my life.
But in 20th century children's basal readers, in Good Times on Our Street, the protagonist, in this case a kitten, learns from their own experiences, their own trial and error. They aren't shamed or punished for their desire to explore. In fact, they're encouraged and celebrated for that desire to explore. So we've been spending all this time talking about this historical context because I think we both, when we picked up Good Times on Our Street, just see like, oh, this is a cute little story. Understanding not only the role that these kind of books were meant to play, but also the very clear 20th century values that they're teaching in contrast with the 19th century ones.
Oh, yeah.
It's shed so much light for us on how it connects to David Lynch's life and work.
Right, because the thing is, in so many interviews, whether you're hearing from other people who know David and have worked with him, or if you're hearing from David, you hear about how like cheerful he is, about how good-hearted he is, and again, just like his sense of humor, the way he talks, even it's all very endearing and not at all like Rollo's.
No.
Like it's not through this like shame and fear and blah blah blah. He has these really good moral values and takes it seriously.
The world of Good Times on Our Street, you know, the world that shapes David Lynch, is this peaceful, orderly, beautiful world. It's where children are safe to explore, create, make mistakes. There's no danger. There's no unresolvable conflict. There is no sense of inherent or lurking evil.
No. Curiosity, creativity, independent thought, and problem solving are actively encouraged and rewarded in children. I mean, if we think about David Lynch's life, you know, projects in his home were celebrated. His creativity was celebrated. He had parents that encouraged him to pursue art. They gave him the opportunity to do that in a way that not all parents would, and especially not in the world of Rollo.
We both have some different quotations from Room to Dream, where Lynch is talking about his childhood in particular. One that I had was him remembering the kind of people his parents were. He says, my parents were so loving and good. They'd had good parents too, and everybody loved my parents. They were just fair. How sweet for a child to remember his parents as being fair and just.
Yeah.
But he also, in this particular section, talks about his parents encouraging his creativity because they themselves were very creative people. He talks about his father having a wood shop everywhere they lived, and his dad was always building things. And here I'm going to quote. He says, "Projects. The word project was so thrilling to everyone in my family. You get an idea for a project, and you get your tools together, and tools are some of the greatest things in the world. That people invent things to make things more precise, it's incredible." My parents took it seriously when I got ideas for things I wanted to make. And so even from the time he's a little kid, if he has an idea to make something, his parents, like the parents in Good Times on Our Street, are there to encourage and support.
Right. It's all about that encouragement that lends to a future where they have this belief that their creativity can bloom. And like in 1962, when David wanted to get his own art studio, his parents agreed to help him pay for the rent, which not all parents would do. They saw that he was passionate about it. And even though they didn't necessarily understand it, in particular his style, there's some mention in the book about them not particularly understanding the sort of like abstract dark style. They were like, why can't you just paint it exactly how it looks? But regardless, they supported him in that. And they said, if this is what you want to do, then this is what you're going to do. They had let him go to college for art, So in Good Times on Our Street, how we were talking about how Hilary mentioned parents supporting and being encouraging, there's a story, When We Grow Up. And it's a story where it's just 2 pages. And it's just, these boys, and father asks them all what they want to be when they grow up. And every time that one of the kids says whatever it is, father's just like, that sounds great. I think you'll do a great job at that. And how about you? That sounds great. I think that you'll really succeed there. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Just really, really encouraging. At no point, regardless of, because some of them, they're just like, I want to be a milkman. And some are like, I want to be a pilot. Whatever it is, he's like, that sounds great. And I wish you luck with that. There's no like, that's not good enough, oh, you can't do that you need a better job than that or something. It's all just supportive.
It is. When you were mentioning that story before we started recording, I said, I love how the first line of it is, father likes Jim's friends.
Yeah. It's so welcoming. It's like, hey, kids, come into the house. Everything's great. Meanwhile, with the Rolo books, it's like, children are bad and evil. Children should never be around.
Other boys are bad and will lead you astray. Only the world of adults is a world where you can learn the right ways of behaving. That was the 19th century view. And that is one way that the 20th century diverged so dramatically. One last time, I'll refer to the Mandel article. The last thing that he points out is that 20th century children's readers reinforce this sense of what he calls 2 worlds, like not in the Twin Peaks sense of between 2 worlds, but there's this world of children's lives and experience that's separate from the adult world, whereas like the 19th century is just one world. It's the world of adults, and it's poor little Rollo's job to learn how to function in that world as quickly as possible, and adults are just there to like criticize them the whole way. But in Good Times on Our Street, it is very much like a child's world.
Oh, yeah. They go on all their little adventures.
Yes.
And as we mentioned before, if adults do pop up, it's kind of brief. And usually they're just like, hi, just here for support.
Yeah. You used the word peripheral or earlier. And I think that's so true that they're on the edge all the time. Just a smiling, benevolent presence on the edge. And David Lynch describes his own childhood like that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, we both really enjoy In Room to Dream, the story about the bomb.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we do.
Because he talks about how children, I think this was in Boise in particular when he's a child, are just kind of free to do their own thing, and they learn how to make pipe bombs.
Yeah. Even earlier in the book, he has a quote that I loved that was, kids then had a lot of freedom to run around. We went everywhere, and we weren't inside in the day ever. We were out doing stuff, and it was fantastic. But yes, a little, like a couple pages later, he talks about how he and his friends decided that they wanted to figure out how to build pipe bombs. And they did that.
So again, that spirit of curiosity, experimentation. But I think that this little anecdote also illustrates not only that creativity and that freedom, but also the consequences.
Yes.
Relate very strongly to Good Times on Our Street.
Right, because so when they do get caught after...
Oh, yeah, because they blow up what was it, an old swimming pool or something?
They're like, hee, and dump it into this pool, and it's really loud. It's a huge explosion. They all go running. David runs to his friend's house with his friend, right? And they're sitting down and like having sandwiches, and then a police officer comes by.
Yes.
But it's not like the officer is like, all right, kids, head to juvie. You're locked up. You're done. Your lives are done here. Your lives end now. The police officer has David write a paper for the police on the duties and obligations of leadership.
So beautiful.
This isn't in the book, but it is in the audiobook version because it's a little bit different. Because the audiobook, it's sort of David just retelling these stories as they come to him. But he describes that when he brings it to them, they just toss it in the trash. They're like, okay, you're done. You did it. Because it's not about, it's not for them to read. It's about the act of him showing responsibility, taking responsibility for those actions, and taking the time to write that. But there's no screaming, there's no yelling, there's nothing written about his parents flipping out on him and being like, all right, you're done for, we're never letting you out of the house again. There's nothing like that. It's just that this was an example where thankfully no one got hurt.
Right.
And the adults in the situation were just like, hey, this could have been bad, so we just want you to think about responsibility.
And leadership.
And that's it.
It's about reinforcing the positive virtues, the positive civic values. So 20th century children's
not
basal
shaming
readers.
them.
No.
It's not like, hey, you're bad. Write an essay about how bad you were and how sorry you are. Because I feel like that's totally a punishment we hear about a lot and stuff where it's like, write a letter or an essay about how sorry you are.
Right.
And that is shaming. That's to say, I'm humiliated in myself. I feel so ashamed for what I've done. But instead they were like, write about how you're going to be more responsible and be a leader and why it's important to be responsible.
And I think that is so the spirit of Good Times on Our Street.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah. It's just like, hey, really soft, gentle hand on your shoulder. Just being like, let's learn. Let's learn from this.
I have this lovely quote actually about Good Times on Our Street from David Lynch. Now, this is from a 1990 article in the French magazine Positif. So this is a quote from David Lynch. He's talking about Good Times on Our Street. He says, "It talks about happiness, everyday surroundings, and being good neighbors. For a young American who comes from a well-to-do family, paradise should be like the street where he lives. I was brought up in that kind of setting, wooden fences and old houses." And he talks about the childhood mindset. Everything seemed serenely beautiful. Airplanes went slowly by in the sky, rubber toys floated in the water, meals seemed to last 5 years, and a nap seemed endless. Everything was pleasant, and Good Times on Our Street recreated that scenario. You learn to read with the book, telling the adventures of Dick, Jane, and their dog Spot. Now, Dick, Jane, and Spot are not in Good Times on Our Street. Right. It's what, Jim, Judy, and...
Yeah, Jim, Judy, and
Bobby,
and all of their little friends.
Right. But he goes on, and I'll finish with this. David Lynch says, "Of course, that world seems very far away, and I am sure that schools have stopped using the book because now probably no one can feel close to the atmosphere portrayed there."
Which is just so heartbreaking because it's just so sweet. It's such a sweet book. I mean, literally the first story is just about Jim and Judy go and they're riding this carousel and they see a little boy who's so sad. Their father has given them money to get on the ride. And this boy is so sad and they're like, "What's going on? What's wrong?" And he says that he's lost his money. So they both had enough money for each of them to have another ride, and they give him their money so that he can ride twice.
And the first thing he says to his dad is that he got 2 rides.
Yeah. Jade gives 2 rides. Sorry, we had to do it.
We both laughed out loud when we got to that line.
We did.
Father, I had 2 rides.
It's like, oh, did you? But it is so sweet. And then the whole point of the story, like the moral of the story, is that they are rewarded because the father is like, oh my gosh, that was so kind of you. And he gives them enough money to ride multiple times, more than just
all
twice.
the children then get to ride because the children on their own make the kind, moral, decent choice. They help support this little crying boy, and then the adult is so delighted.
It's kind of like
their goodness.
Yeah, it's kind of like we were just talking earlier today about honor codes. It's the children of Good Times on Our Street really operate on that kind of honor code mentality where it's just mutual respect, mutual trust. You know, they show this generosity to another child because of the good of their hearts. Yeah. And then the generosity of that father is also a reward to them. Yes. It's this generosity that goes back and forth. It is just this mutual care in their community.
It is a genuine community.
Yeah.
It is. Going back to David Lynch saying, like, we can't relate to this atmosphere anymore. Probably when we both first picked up this book, it's hard not to look at it with irony and kind of sarcasm.
It's a little bit silly at times, but
yeah, because most of
it's so sweet.
Yeah, and most of the time now in the 21st century, when we look back at these old Dick and Jane stories, it's like most of the scholarship on them is basically criticizing how they weren't representative of American experience at all, right? We also see it show up most famously at the beginning of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye.
Yes, yes.
Where Toni Morrison, of course, she repeats the same little passage from a Dick and Jane story 3 times. Each time it gets kind of more blended together, till finally it's just one giant run-on word. And of course, she's doing that to contrast with the incredibly harsh, brutal, dehumanizing reality of her protagonist in The Bluest Eye.
Yeah, listeners, if you haven't read it, it is a very, very dark and difficult story of a young girl and her experiences and how she really did not have that, bright, sweet life. So when Morrison is using that, it is to set this up as a comparison of like, oh, look how lovely and stuff. And then, well, that's not how it is for everyone.
Right. It's more like this is the fiction and the reality is this child's story in The Bluest Eye. Yeah. I think you and I have also both talked about how we see so often and both genuinely like the modern parodies of Dick and Jane, like let's summon demons with Dick and Jane.
Yeah. There's this artist, Stephen Rhodes, who is kind of the big one who makes a lot of these like T-shirts and posters where it'll be like Easy Bake Oven, but it's like you're making pot brownies or something, or it's like, oh, adopting a pet, and it's like something out of Pet Sematary, so it's like we go back on this nostalgia, on this like cutesy stuff nowadays with I've even seen like we were talking about fake ads that artists have done renditions of like childhood games, but it's this like where it should have been this cutesy game and now it's like what if it was cosmic horror though? So it's so easy for us now to be like, well, the world is actually really dark, so this cutesy stuff is too cute. And now we have to make it really dark. We have to make it adult.
We look on it with suspicion and kind of derision and all the artistic evocations that we see of these books and this era is ironic now. And we're not criticizing that because it's very funny. But it's such a contrast, I think, to David Lynch.
Yeah.
Because instead of portraying this ironically, he really embraces it.
Yeah, he's so earnest. I mean, even just the way he talks. There's this interview that we both really love, an interview with Sherilyn Fenn, and she's being asked what it's like to work with David Lynch. And I just love the description she has of him. So we're going to put that in right here so you can listen to it.
Well, it's not that he's weird. He's just kind of so, apple pie in a way. Do you know what I mean? When I met him, well, he's very well, doggone it, I don't understand what the heck just happened. That's the kinds of things that he'll say, It's like, what, David? Or Sherilyn, that was Jim Dandy. Like, okay, I guess that means it was good, huh, Dave? He's real kind of straight in a way, which is kind of odd because it's that, that paradox. He seems so straight, but then he's got all these strange things going on in his head.
And then in Room to Dream, I love this quote from Isabella Rossellini about Lynch on the set of Blue Velvet. She talks about him maintaining this sunny disposition. He apparently would just ride around set on a pink bicycle with streamers fluttering from the handlebars and his pockets full of peanut M&Ms. And Isabella Rossellini said, David is a genuinely happy person, and this is one of the remarkable things about him. I've never met anyone as serene as he is. I remember saying to him, you wake up in the morning and you're happy. Is it a gene he has that should be cloned?
Oh, that's so sweet.
It's so sweet. And then Laura Dern also said, I think part of his happiness has to do with the fact that he places no limits on himself as a creative person. There's a lot of self-judgment and shame in our culture, and David doesn't have any of that.
And that is Good Times on Our Street.
He was raised not to feel shameful about his decisions, about his creativity. Mm-hmm. Again, it goes back to that story of all the boys telling father what they want to do with their lives, mm-hmm. and no matter what it is, he is supportive. He's like, that sounds great. I think you'll have a lot of fun with that. I think you'll really do well with that.
Right. And that lack of shame and self-judgment, that ability to just get an idea and have the confidence to go with it, I think is the key to so much of his brilliance.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so many stories, and they talk about it a lot in Room to Dream, too, in many different examples over his career of times where he has really gone all out for the details on sets, on his movies. I know they mentioned that for Eraserhead, he made dust bunnies to put under the radiator.
Yeah.
Because he was like, well, what if the camera catches it? I want to make sure they're in the shot.
And they're not.
I know. But it's those little details, and he makes them all.
Oh, yeah. I mean, of course, the stories of him making everything on the set of Eraserhead, so famous, right? Yeah. Nobody knows how he created the baby.
Right.
Those kinds of things. But also on The Elephant Man.
Yeah.
Right?
Which, admittely, that didn't go
work
super well. But he tried.
He believed he should be the one making John Hurt's makeup.
Yes.
For The Elephant Man. Yeah, and that kind of hands-on, go with the ideas. Look at how he filmed Inland Empire.
Yeah.
Not having really a sense of what the story was, what the overall plot was, just going from idea to idea, searching. And the result is this brilliant, exciting, fascinating film.
Right. I mean, it's just a fever dream. It's like, it is like having a dream at night, and the way that it jumps around from setting to setting. And then sometimes you find yourself back in that place again, that dream that you had second or something. It's beautiful. This is what we love so much about David, is that he's not afraid to get really weird with it, really fun with it.
The whole focus on inquiry and exploration and trying things out. Yeah. I think that just resonates through all of his work. And I love that it's in the cauldron of this 20th century children's reader, that these values are instilled in him, in addition to those that his family teaches, but that this book has meant so much to him and that he's referred so much to it. This has to be part of why, right? It's so much his spirit as well, as an artist.
I feel like this is like a good part to bring up this really cute interview that he did with Mark Cousins.
Oh, yeah. This was in, we have the date on there.
Yeah, 99.
1999, and it was on the BBC. And Mark Cousins brought up Good Times on Our Street and had a physical copy of it on set.
And David was so excited.
Yeah, he wanted to smell it.
He wanted to smell it. It's so sweet.
Yeah, it's a beautiful smell. Let's smell it.
Yes, listeners, We're smelling our books. They smell so good.
It has that classic old book smell.
It does.
It really
It's so lovely.
But go ahead. What did you want to say about the interview?
Yeah, I just love that he was so excited to see it. Like this, it was like an old friend.
Yeah, and he has this nice quotation in that interview as well about childhood influences. He says, I think there's a time in you to go out and gather things. And they say that when you're little, the window is open. And then the window closes, not all the way, but closes for safety reasons. So stuff stops coming in, and you can work with, things that are there. And new things can pop in and join with them. But now it's a time, to start doing some things with the things you've gathered. Later, he says, inside we're ageless. And when we talk to ourselves, it's the same person we were talking to, the same age when we were little. And it's the body that changes around that ageless center.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that goes so well with how they described him on set, riding a little bicycle with his peanut M&Ms, he's got this very childlike, fun-loving energy to him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that language around you take things in when you're little, right? And the fact that he keeps coming back to this children's book and reference after reference, it's he's just, as Christine McKenna said, he's let it lodge itself permanently in his brain.
Yeah, and in a beautiful, it's a very lovely thing.
Yes.
To have taken into himself.
For those who are familiar with Lynch's early films, the alphabet in particular, he said is in some way about the anxiety of learning to read. And he talks about how much he hated school and hated all those kinds of lessons you have to do. It makes it even more special that he feels so attached to this book, which would have been a core part of that process that he hated.
Yeah.
He hated learning to read. He made a whole short nightmarish film about the misery of learning to read. And yet the very instrument of that supposed torture, Good Times on Our Street, he just remembers in this hazy glow of nothing but goodness and light. So I think the powerful positive influence of this book is even more significant considering how much he hated reading.
Yeah, I mean, it just radiates positivity. Yeah. But literally, even at the back of the book, there is a word list of all of the words that you can learn from reading this book. This is, it's to teach values for sure, but a big part of it is also just to teach kids to read.
Yes. Well, we're going to transition now to talking about particular films and works of David Lynch that connect with Good Times on Our Street. And the most obvious, the one he's talked about numerous times, is Blue Velvet.
Yes.
So we can't deny the opening imagery of Blue Velvet comes right from the pages of Good Times on Our Street. And we're not making that up. David Lynch has said that directly.
Yeah. So when you open up this book, when you look at the pictures, which listeners, I will post pictures on the Instagram so that you can take a look, you will see how it's this bright colors. There's all these, the classic picket fences, beautiful neighborhoods. Everything is so darling and charming. And again, bright, beautiful colors, really sweet imagery.
Yeah, and one image, I know I turned to a page where there's this little bicycle parade, and there is the waving fireman. So of course that slow waving fireman at the beginning of Blue Velvet seems to come right from the pages here of Good Times on Our Street. But I think the page that made us both gasp audibly when we turned to it
was the robins. There's a whole story about the robins returning. And I mean, of course, that is going to be tied to Blue Velvet and Sandy's story, her monologue about her dream of the robins.
In the dream, there was our world. And the world was dark because there weren't any robins. And the robins represented love. And for the longest time, there was just this darkness. And all of a sudden, thousands of robins were set free. And they flew down and brought this blinding light of love. And it seemed like that love would be the only thing that would make any difference. And it did. it means there is trouble till the robins come.
So, admittedly, the first time I saw Blue Velvet, I thought it was a joke. I was waiting for the punchline after Sandy's monologue because it seemed, I'm almost ashamed to admit this, it seemed so over the top. There she is, the lovely blonde. There are church windows in the background. There's organ music swelling behind her. It's almost heavy-handed, like she's this Madonna figure.
Yeah.
And she's saying this little speech about the robins. And I was waiting. It's funny how I can remember this, right?
Yeah.
I was waiting for Jeffrey's face to be like, who is this crazy girl? And instead, when it shifts to Kyle MacLachlan, and he seems to have tears in his eyes.
Yeah,
And
it's so genuine.
And he just says, "You're a neat girl." Oh my goodness.
He's just incredibly moved by her hope.
Yes. And I remember realizing in that moment, oh, this is different. Blue Velvet is undermining all of my expectations here.
Right.
I have to see this with different eyes
Yeah.
than the ones I usually watch movies with. I can't be looking for irony and sarcasm.
Right. You have to look for David Lynch's earnestness.
Right.
Because that's the thing is they talk all the time about how, so many people have said it where Kyle often plays different versions of David, basically.
Right.
He's playing these characters like Cooper that are like so earnest.
Yes.
And are just sort of different parts of David's psyche.
Yes. And Sandy's whole speech comes in response to Jeffrey saying, like, why is there so much trouble in the world? Why are there people like Frank? So he's responding to the darkness. Now,
Yes.
this story about the robins in Good Times on Our Street is all about the joy of the robins returning.
Right.
So I think we have a vividly clear connection with
Yeah.
Good Times on Our Street here.
And the imagery too. I mean, even just the pictures. Again, I'll post them on our Instagram so you can see. But just those bright colors, the way it's so kind and gentle, the imagery.
Yeah. But Good Times on Our Street, it's not the whole world.
No, there is a different side of town as well.
Yes. And another story that David Lynch tells frequently is about this moment in his own childhood when he and his brother have their first vision, their first sighting of this other world. Indigo, do you want to read this bit?
Yeah. So again, this is in Room to Dream. David says, I was out one night with my brother, and we were down at the end of the street. Everything is lit up at night now, but in the 50s, in small towns like Boise, there were street lights, but they were dimmer, and it was much darker. It makes night kind of magical because things just go into the black. So we were down at the end of the street at night, and out of the darkness, it was so incredible, came this nude woman with white skin. Maybe it was something about the light and the way she came out of the darkness, but it seemed to me that her skin was the color of milk, and she had a bloodied mouth. She couldn't walk very well, and she was in bad shape, and she was completely naked. I'd never seen that. And she was coming towards us, but not really seeing us. My brother started to cry, and she sat down on the curb. I wanted to help her, but I was young and didn't know what to do. I might have asked, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" But she didn't say anything. She was scared and beat up. But even though she was traumatized, she was beautiful.
Yeah. We've seen iterations of that in many interviews. I know The Art Life.
Yeah.
He tells that story in that documentary as well. Seeing that vision of that woman come onto the imagery of Good Times on Our Street is very jarring. And I imagining that.
Yeah.
I think that's what that experience must have been like for him. So if we open the pages of this little children's book and then suddenly picture, I don't see it as a painting like we see in this book. I see it as a photograph.
Yeah.
Right. This vividly real woman who suddenly appears, who's so clearly been through something terrible, absolutely terrible.
It's almost like when you're talking about a painting and stuff versus a photograph, I just kind of got an image in my mind of like if you did a cutout of a photograph collaged over these beautiful streets. It doesn't fit. It's not in the same plane, really.
No, it's a different world. It's a rip in the fabric of this reality. And here's this other reality that exists beside it. And that, of course, leads beautifully into Blue Velvet as well. So Blue Velvet sets up these two different worlds, right? There's what I think we both like to call the Our Street world, right?
Yeah.
In reference to Good Times on Our Street, which is Jeffrey's neighborhood. And then there's what Jeffrey's aunt calls like Down by Lincoln, right? Which is where Dorothy's apartment is. It's the world of Frank Booth and his friends.
And his darkness.
And the darkness. And so these worlds exist side by side, kind of like in David Lynch's experience, his little idyllic Good Times on Our Street, and then suddenly this woman appearing as a victim of that other side of that darkness.
Stumbling into their light.
Yes, yeah. Dorothy does exactly that in this moment in Blue Velvet. So if the world of Good Times on Our Street is this place where children are safe and encouraged, and it's not a dangerous world, there's no lurking evil. On the dark side of Blue Velvet, that's not true at all. In fact, we see a child that is very, very unsafe, right?
Dorothy's son is not safe. He's literally, his life is being leveraged to manipulate and harm her. He's being used as a tool where he's being hurt and she's being hurt. And it's so horrifying and heartbreaking.
Yeah. And, it's interesting how the symbol of that little boy is that beanie with the propeller on it, which
seems so Good Times on Our Street.
It does. It's such an over-the-top, innocent image.
Yes.
And that's what she's clinging to in this very sad apartment, which is the site of so much violence and degradation. And that's, of course, what we see him wearing at the end after she's been saved and redeemed. But, this Down by Lincoln world, right? This world of Frank Booth is just full of just incomprehensible violence and despair.
And chaos.
Yeah. It's a nightmarish place.
Yeah.
The Good Times on Our Street side, like Jeffrey's neighborhood, is orderly and peaceful. It's this lovely...
It's this, nostalgic, cutesy, small town kind of vibe.
Yeah. A lot of discourse I see about Blue Velvet suggests that it's about the seedy underbelly of suburbia, that it's about what's the reality, the dark reality of suburbia. That's personally not how I see Blue Velvet. I do see them as two side-by-side worlds.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing, is they're in the same town, but it's to show that there is this separation. There's separation of class, depending on what kind of resources you have accessible to you. This is what a real town looks like. There's the rich suburbs, and then there's the struggling city. And I mean, the thing is, it's like two sides of the same coin. It's in this same space. They're not different dimensions, but, and maybe rich is the wrong word, but like middle class.
Okay,
his father is a business owner. And again, we don't know necessarily Dorothy's past. Like, was that the apartment she was living in with her husband? Did they live somewhere else? Or is this just where Frank is keeping her? That's like her jail cell. But either way, it's, you've got like a house versus an apartment. There's definitely some separations in class and resources, I think, going on. Yeah, I would say, I think I see them in this like same realm, but it's like, the two faces of it.
Okay.
Kind of.
Yeah. I think that a lot of times it's that initial shot of the beetles underneath the green grass that might lead people to think that, this is the deep, dark reality of the, quote, Our Street world. Right. But I guess I don't see the world of Frank Booth as having a whole lot to do with Jeffrey and Sandy's neighborhood.
Yeah.
A scene that we've both talked about quite a bit is like when Jeffrey and Sandy are coming back from the party and they're being chased.
Right, yeah.
In a car.
I mean, chased.
Yeah. And Jeffrey thinks it's Frank.
Yeah.
And
he's so scared.
He's terrified for Sandy's sake.
Oh, yeah, for
too.
sure.
And it's not Frank.
No.
It's Sandy's boyfriend.
Yeah, it's just them being stupid teenage boys.
It's a version of anger and quote, malice on the good side, right?
Right. It's just like stereotypical jock being like I don't know, dumb and bullyish.
Yeah, and that interaction, that threat of violence from the boyfriend is interrupted by the vision of Dorothy.
Which stops everyone in their track.
Dorothy appearing there as a victim of true deep darkness and evil just grinds everything to a halt. And the boys who were intimidating and threatening Jeffrey, all of a sudden now are so sweet.
Yeah, up until that moment, they're like, how dare you? We're going to get you. You try to take my girl. And all of a sudden, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Is she okay?
Right.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's like the extreme violence that Dorothy represents, the aftermath of there.
They've never seen anything like it.
They've never seen anything like it. It stops everyone.
Not on their
emotionally.
street.
Not on our street.
Yeah.
And that's why I think they're separate worlds,
Right.
in a sense, as opposed to that Dorothy somehow represents the reality of this suburban neighborhood. Also, I mean, Dorothy shows up there, and that's where she's saved.
Yeah. This is where she's taken in. She's cared for. She's protected. You know, they take her to Sandy's house to be safe. They're looking for her dad. You know, her mom helps and stuff. Like, they want to make sure that she is okay. This is like the part of this town. Like, again, if we see it as like these two sides of this town, rather than like the seedy underbelly, it's like she has come from the dark side of town into the light side.
Yeah.
Where she is immediately, like, even these boys that up until that moment were acting aggressive, they're suddenly like, is she okay?
Yeah.
You know, they take her to Sandy's house and her mom's like, is she okay? Everybody wants to care for her and make sure that she's okay.
Right. And
which she has not been used to up until this. Well, no, not recently, at least.
No, like, she's put in an ambulance. And this is the end of her torture.
Yeah.
It's when she crosses that line into Jeffrey's neighborhood that her torture comes to an end because she gets the help she needs.
She gets away from the darkness.
Physically.
Yeah.
And emotionally.
Yeah, has been physically removed from the place of darkness.
It's almost like David Lynch is remembering being that child who saw that woman, and this is what he wishes he could have done.
Right. And he even said that, you know, he was like, I was so young.
Right.
And I think that's the thing. How we just said, Kyle is often these representations of different parts of David's psyche, his characters are. And I think that this is a way for David to work. I mean, he has said that this has inspired a lot of Blue Velvet, that experience had. And this is his way of saying, like, if I were a grown man.
Yeah, this is what I would have done.
This is what I would have done. If I was not a little boy and I didn't know what to do in that scenario, if I was a grown up, I would have known what to do.
Yeah.
I would have known to take you to the hospital. I could have, you know, wrapped you in a blanket. I could have protected you.
Right. So when Jeffrey leaves his world and goes over to the dark world, right, the world of Frank Booth, it gets him involved in all kinds of violence, and he himself becomes a perpetrator of violence against Dorothy. It brings out this kind of ugly darkness in him. And when Dorothy crosses over into Jeffrey's world, that's when she's able to be saved and protected. I think it's really powerful and interesting. You know, so I know that the suburban vision in Blue Velvet can seem kind of schmaltzy and fake, but I think it's really meant to be a very wholesome
Well, I think, like, just as we've been talking, a thought that came into my mind is a good comparison would be like Edward Scissorhands.
Oh, good,
Where,
yeah.
like, in that case, that one, they are making fun of that.
They are.
They're making fun of this suburb where everything looks the same. Everyone's all peachy keen and you know, like, too, like, cloyingly sweet, but super fake. And everyone has these cruel intentions hidden behind all of their kind words or whatever. They don't actually mean well by each other. But this is actually a neighborhood where they do mean well.
Yes, I think that's true. And I wonder if some of the general reading of Blue Velvet is because we do tend to look at that suburban vision with skepticism or hostility. And so maybe it's more us projecting our own distaste and distrust of that too clean, too good suburbia. the way the Dick and Jane books are regarded with so much irony and sarcasm now.
Right. Yeah, it's just a joke now. It's like, oh, Dick and Jane. Or like I feel like that's such a, I feel like I've heard that used as kind of an insult sometimes with people. They'll be like, oh, you're so Dick and Jane or something, like you're
Right.
goody two shoes.
Yes, yes.
It's like, what's wrong with being good and nice?
I think that there is a weirdly artificial look to especially of the robin, right? So the robin is our vision from Good Times on Our Street that comes back as like a fulfillment of Sandy's dream. The robin looks weird. And I know you're you're very interested in why the robin looks weird.
I am. Because, well, so here's the thing is, so as we said, with Good Times on Our Street, there is this story of the robins. And again, this book is lodged in David's mind. It is a part of who he is. And I think that imagery really stuck with him because they're beautiful. The illustrations are beautiful. And so as Sandy says, that there will be trouble until the robins come. So we have to end on this beautiful note. Well, I guess we don't have to, but David would like to have us end on, the final scene we're looking at. And you can see, I'll post the comparison sort of. There's this scene of kids gazing out the window at the robin. And it's so like Jeffrey and Sandy gazing at the robin. And so it's like we've got this image that David loved so much and wanted so badly to be in it, but it was really hard to achieve that. But he was so determined to get it that he was like, we'll figure it out. So in Room to Dream, they explain a lot of this. So basically the number one issue that they faced, or the first issue at least, was that robins and their nests are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So you cannot catch a robin and use it for your film. You are not allowed to be outside grabbing birds. And like Fred Caruso found a trainer who said he had a trained robin, but then when they brought it, it was like molting and in a cage and really sad. Like probably the trainer was not taking good care of it. And it just did not work. They took one look at it and they were like, this is not the beautiful robin that we need. And also, Fred Caruso was like, there's no such thing as a trained robin. Like it was not following directions or anything. So they weren't getting the shots they wanted. And it was really getting down to the wire. It was like getting down to the end of the shoot. They were getting really desperate. But they had kind of put the word out that they were in need of a robin. People in the area knew. And so nearby, it just so happened that Robin either like flew into a bus, like the side of the bus, or got hit by the bus. But either way, it died. And people knew that they were looking for a robin. So they got contacted. They were like, what's up? This robin just got hit by a bus.
And it can be in your movie.
And we can taxidermy it. And would you like to use it? And they were like, oh, yes, please. But of course, it was stuffed. It didn't look quite right. And also, David had this vision of it moving, looking very alive. So what they did was David mounted the robin. This is a direct quote from the book. David mounted the robin on a windowsill and put a live bug in its mouth. And now we had a stuffed robin that didn't move. So David took monofilament threads, tied them to the robin's head so it would move, and then got down in the bushes below the window and manipulated the threads. But it's like, it's really sweet because it's just like David was like so very much, he was like, no, we have to have the robin. This is how the story has to end. And of course, like, nowadays you could just do like a CGI bird, but back then, that wasn't really like a huge option, especially like with their budget, I'm sure.
Right.
So he made the best of a tough situation because he was committed to this image being in the film. And even though it looks kind of weird.
Yeah, but I mean, putting the bug in its mouth, I know that was part of making it look a little better.
He wanted it like to have the mouth kind of moving and stuff. It's just they wanted to have it look alive. So he had like the threads and then also with the bug, just like pretty much anything to keep it moving.
And then symbolically, it really works with the beginning of the film because if those beetles under the grass, right, symbolize this kind of darkness in this town, in this world. Here's the robin who Sandy says symbolizes love, piercing and devouring that beetle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
like-
kind of heavy-handed as symbolism goes, but
Yeah.
but I'm here for it. I like it.
Yeah, it's taking on the beetle. It's like, hey, get out of here.
Yeah.
Get out of this neighborhood. Get out of the light. You're not part of this.
You're not part of the light. And so even if we think that the robin looks kind of unsettling, if it's not as beautiful as the images in Good Times on Our Street, even if it does convey this idea that this wholesome suburban vision is something of an artifice, I still think that Blue Velvet sees that artifice as a very necessary one. It's like a defense against the darkness. It's a defense against the world of Frank Booth and that whole side of the film, that it's not a Heart of Darkness story.
No.
You know, it's not that the safe surface is a delusion. It's a necessary defense. And I think that's why we're left with Dorothy's joy at the end, too. Her face, her reunion with her child. This is a positive end for her. Like, we're meant to feel good at the end of Blue Velvet, not creeped out.
Yeah, it's the return of the robins. The light is winning now.
And David Lynch feels this way, right? About the darkness in general. And so speaking in Lynch on Lynch about Blue Velvet, he says that's the subject of Blue Velvet. You apprehend things, and when you try to see what it's all about, you have to live with it. So there's light and varying degrees of darkness. He says of Jeffrey, you can't keep doing things that you can't live with. You're going to get sick, or you're going to go crazy, and you're going to get arrested, right? And he sees Jeffrey as the bridge between these two worlds.
Yeah.
And much earlier in Lynch on Lynch, Chris Audley says, people are often disturbed by the darker side of their own psyches. You seem relatively comfortable with yours. Why is that? And David Lynch answers, I have no idea. I've always been that way. I've always liked both sides and believe that in order to appreciate one, you have to know the other. The more darkness you can gather up, the more light you can see too. You know? So Jeffrey's experience with the darkness, he does have to leave it behind.
Yeah.
He doesn't like it. It's a terrible world. But it has opened up in him perhaps a capacity to experience more light.
Right. I mean, that's the thing is when you have those kinds of experiences, it also reminds you how lucky you are that you like have, for example, he definitely realizes that he's like so lucky to have all these loved ones around him that are protecting him and stuff, because Dorothy did not.
Right. Oh,
which
yeah.
is why he had to dive in there to save her and pull her
Dorothy
out of
is
it.
completely unprotected.
Because she did not belong there.
No. Dorothy is not someone who belongs to the darkness.
No.
Frank Booth does.
Yes.
Right, but Dorothy does not. So where are some other places that we think Good Times on Our Street resonates? I think we should start with Fire Walk With Me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as we kind of talked about, it's got these beautiful illustrations, and that kind of art style is just something we also see in Laura's guardian angel painting. She's seeking this comfort. How we were saying, like, this book just like radiates goodness. Like when you're flipping through it, it's so sweet. It's hard not to smile and like feel a tenderness in you. And that's how Laura associates with that painting of the angels that she has on her wall. And then it's so heartbreaking when the angels leave and she feels abandoned by it. It's all about like seeking this hope and redemption. But the robins return for her too.
Yeah.
Her angel comes for her.
Right. I love that print actually seems to come directly from the 1940s, which would be the exact same era as Good Times on Our Street. So that image of the guardian angel with the children, the artwork is very similar.
Yes.
Same style as this book. Yeah, that Laura looks to that so earnestly and so intently as a vision of hope for salvation from her dark situation. In the missing pieces from Fire Walk With Me, Doc Hayward refers to this again. He finds a piece of paper that has a secret message for Laura, and he reads it to her. The message says, "The angels will return, and when you see the one that's meant to help you, you will weep with joy." And I really love that the image that connects most deeply with Good Times on Our Street is the ultimate one for Laura's redemption and ultimate joy. Yeah.
And also like the Hayward house in general.
Oh, it's
like,
very Our Street.
yeah. I mean, like they have their sweet little dinner party, you know, they're all like good students. And if any of you have listened to our episode with Colin from Creamcorn in the Universe about the Haywards, specifically our Harriet Hayward, there's that scene where Donna is breaking curfew. Harriet's like, okay, sure,
Oh, this is in the pilot of Twin Peaks.
Yes, yeah. So, but she knows when Doc Hayward comes in and is like, where's your sister? She tells him because she knows that they have a safe family.
Yes.
She knows that Donna's not going to be in trouble. And she isn't. That's the thing. When Doc Hayward picks her up, they have a really lovely conversation in the car ride. Donna's not going to get yelled at.
Right.
She's not going to be told, oh, you're bad. You're a terrible daughter. She's not going to get, this crazy punishment because they have that good times on our street, loving, supportive family.
He says something to her to the effect of, you know what you've put us through, given everything that's happened today. But I know you wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for a good reason.
Right. He trusts her.
He trusts her. He has this faith in her goodness and her judgment that, is very resonant with the attitude of parents.
Yeah, giving them that
basal
agency.
Reader. Yes. And even for him to say, we're so grateful to have a daughter like you, or something like that.
Because the whole point is that she cares and that she wants to figure out what's happened.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, a lot of Twin Peaks feels like Good Times on Our Street, like Lucy and Andy, the whole, cherry pie side. The redemption arcs that we see of both Bobby and in the return of Ben Horn. Even in the return with Janie E. and Sonny Jim.
Yeah.
Sonny Jim's wallpaper, his curtains, and his lampshade all have artwork that evokes this same era.
Yeah.
It's like
the cutesy nostalgia.
Yeah, cowboys, but
Right.
it's definitely this same era of Good Times on Our Street, too.
And especially because, that's really set in a modern era.
Yeah.
So it's like for his room to look that way is so deliberate.
They'd have to be getting that stuff from a vintage store.
Yeah. Or like an Etsy artist or something, like somebody's making it custom.
Right. Do you think that Major Briggs from Twin Peaks is a Good Times on Our Street dad?
I think so. I mean, we've talked about a lot that his monologue to Bobby, it brings me to tears every time. Because after everything that Bobby's done up until this point, all the mistakes he's made, he hasn't always been the best. But he's talking about seeing him in this light and seeing him really thrive in the future and succeeding and stuff, which is, and he's saying it so sweetly, so with so much love and earnestness.
Yeah, he believes in Bobby's innate goodness.
He does.
And he has utmost faith that goodness is going to win out and come to the forefront.
Right.
Yeah.
That Bobby is going to learn from the experiences that he's had and take away from that these lessons.
The only exception when it comes to Major Briggs, I think, is in the pilot when he hits Bobby or something and causes that cigarette to fly. That seems so out of character for him as a whole. But I think it's quickly fixed by the rest of Major Briggs's characterization.
Yeah, otherwise he has such a calm demeanor.
Yes, and so truly understanding and nurturing and encouraging.
Yeah.
And then even, of course, in the return when Betty says, your father saw this for you. Your father saw this future for you at a time when you were in a very different place.
Right.
Connecting back to Sandy's speech about the robins and love returning, that Major Briggs's greatest fear is the possibility that love is not enough.
Yeah.
I think could fit quite nicely with Good Times on Our Street, too. If Good Times on Our Street is a world where there isn't a lot of danger or fear, I really like the idea that Major Briggs fears that maybe this won't be enough. This won't be enough to fence against the darkness that he as an adult knows is out there.
Right. And also, I mean, in Twin Peaks, the darkness is a lot heavier than just a seedy side of town.
Yeah. It's way deeper than Frank Booth.
So his fears are heard. I hear him on that.
For sure. I think the last place that we really see Good Times on Our Street strongly appear is in Straight Story.
Yeah, Straight Story is one of my favorite and underrated, in my opinion, David Lynch movies, because it is I mean, it's a Disney movie, technically. So
Sure.
it's got to have that tenderness to it. But also, again, it's based off a true story. And I think that's what draws David Lynch to it. I think that's what enticed him about it, is that it is this true story about this man who wants to do something very earnest and do something with so much love. And there's so many opportunities along his journey that he could be made fun of, that people could ridicule him. But what we see more than anything is the kindness of strangers and the generosity of strangers that reach out and see. I mean, even there are people in his town and stuff when he's leaving that are like, this is pretty foolish. This is pretty foolish of you. But the people he meets on the road are all like, this is really amazing.
Yeah. I mean, he is potentially making a big mistake.
Yeah.
Right? But instead of criticizing him, there's no Rollo's dad.
No.
Obviously, Alvin is an old man.
Yeah.
But there's no voice in that film that's going to criticize or ridicule him for this. Instead, this benevolent world just supports him and encourages him and helps him bring his vision to a reality, helps him reunite with his brother.
Right. And that's the other thing, too, is it is a story of values and morals where no one has asked him to do this. No one has shamed him into going to make amends with his brother. He takes it upon himself to respect himself and respect his brother enough that when he hears that his brother is dying, he's like, I have to fix this.
Yeah.
I have to step up and be responsible and go to him, even though it is very difficult, even though I have to do it in a very bizarre way, because this is what I have accessible to me. I have to do this because it's the right thing to do.
Even the way he speaks to that runaway girl who's pregnant, he doesn't lecture her or shame her for that. He gives his little metaphor of the bundle of sticks. It's very gentle.
Yeah, he shares his food with her.
Yeah.
He's very welcoming. And, that kind of situation, she has probably had a lot of already bad experiences.
Yes.
Maybe has some ahead of her on her own journey. And having a stranger show you that level of kindness and understanding when you are going through something so difficult is so life-changing.
It really is. It is. And I love that, he's on his own journey of remedying his past mistakes. That, out of his own realization, as you said, he's encouraging her to kind of have the same realization for herself, as he does other people along that journey, the fighting brothers and so forth too.
Yeah.
It's really nice. It's this gentle, benevolent world that we see in Good Times on Our Street, where people are making mistakes, taking chances, but instead of being criticized or thwarted in those efforts, it's just met with so much warmth and support and encouragement.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. We see this imagery a little bit in Mulholland Drive.
Yeah, definitely in the color, for
Yes.
sure. The colorization of everything, those bright colors.
Especially the Betty and Rita story.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and when we start off with Betty's jitterbug contest.
Oh, yeah,
that
that's right out
whole
of the
vibe.
post-World War II era, the jitterbug coming out of the 30s and 40s. So that's very much the world of Good Times on Our Street.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not that there's jitterbugging in the book.
Yeah.
just the same era of history. Yeah, and even Betty's language. I know I sometimes hear people making fun of the way she's like, okay, Coco, and she's so earnest. Oh, golly gee vibes. That sure fits with this book too. And very much also with the way David Lynch speaks.
Yes. Yeah. I think how we kind of talked about sometimes Kyle is his character's a representation. I feel like maybe she's a little bit of David in that. Just especially in the way that she talks.
Betty. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And finally, we want to talk about the way this book, Good Times on Our Street, ends. It ends with a capuchin monkey.
How fitting.
How fitting. I've seen a lot of discussion about where does the capuchin monkey come from, because we see it in Inland Empire, we see it in Twin Peaks. And months ago, I saw someone say, oh, it comes from this H.G. Wells story. And I very eagerly went and read that story, and it didn't work for that, didn't work for me. But when we opened Good Times on Our Street to the very last page and see a picture of a capuchin monkey,
That's what we see.
That's what we see. And so Capuchin Monkey appears in two different stories. One is about a baby elephant who wants the monkey's hat.
And there's quite a little scrap about it, but it ends well.
Baby elephant's kind of a jerk. But there's a little monkey there. But the final story in Good Times on Our Street is about this monkey who was tricked into losing its tail. Tricked by a rabbit, and then, very entertainingly to me, the monkey's tail is given to a cat who looks incredibly self-satisfied.
Looks really silly with this tail.
But very pleased with itself nonetheless, wearing this monkey's tail. And so the monkey goes on this journey to get its tail back, which includes then going into the clouds to asking the clouds for rain and all kinds of strange things. And so we're left with this capuchin monkey quite successfully getting his tail back. We know it's a capuchin because we did way more than our due diligence to figure out what this painting was.
I do want to say you deserve all the credit because we had been talking about it and you were like, it's just, there are some things that are just not adding up though. And then tonight when Hilary came to record, she was like, I figured it out.
Yeah, because its coloring resembles a little bit more of a gibbon. Gibbons don't have tails. And after using many, many photographs of various monkeys. Why? The problem with this illustration in Good Times on Our Street is that the painter has chosen to make the monkey's face black, where capuchins tend to have a pale face. So it was a stylistic choice. It's not a nature book. They're not going for accuracy here, but yeah,
probably the author was like, all right, illustrator, we need a monkey. And the illustrator was like, okay, I totally know what monkeys look like.
The capuchin monkeys would have been the most commonly seen in that era too. They're the most easily trained. They're the organ grinder monkey, the circus monkey. So that's the one that children would have been familiar with for sure in the 1940s too.
Right.
So it still doesn't crack the code of why the capuchin monkey appears and says the name Judy or what it's doing in an inland empire. But why does David Lynch like capuchin monkeys? Probably because they're in Good Times on Our Street.
Multiple times, and it's the final story that we end on.
Final image.
Yeah,
Final
that would be
image.
the lasting image as you close the book.
And isn't that one of our final images in Fire Walk with Me?
Yeah, I think so.
And it's in the conclusion of Inland Empire too. Just like Good Times on Our Street, David Lynch likes to end with a monkey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess we're kind of ending with a monkey.
We're ending with a monkey too.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
We've been inspired.
Well, our next episode coming up in about a month is going to be an Uncanny Resonance episode on Alice in Wonderland.
Something we both love very much.
And after that, we're looking at an illusion episode. So we're going to be talking about the Marlon Brando film, The Wild One.
Which will be really fun to do, I think.
Yes, because it's alluded to directly in the character of
Wally Brando.
Wally Brando.
It's just a hoot. Let's be real.
So we have those two episodes coming up soon. We look forward to having you with us then.
Yes, and also somewhere around there, you might just hear us on Counter Esperanto.
Yeah, things in the works. So thank you once again for listening to The Full Blossom of the Evening, and we'll sign off with...
It was Laura, and she's come to kiss you goodbye.
Goodbye, listeners.
Goodbye.
Gary, I have no idea where this will lead us, but I have a definite feeling it will be a place both wonderful and strange.
It was Laura, and I saw her glowing. I saw her smiling.